Get going. Okay, hello. Okay, we're gonna get going. I'd like to welcome Maria Yasmenez from Sherwin-Williams to intro our next session.
Testing. Not that he needs an introduction. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce you today to Adrian Edge of Fenestration Canada. As the Director of Codes and Regulatory Affairs, he is our industry representative at the National Codes Committee. And today he's going to speak to you on a topic that is very familiar, solar heat gains. Everyone, Adrian Edge.
All right. So, Maria, thank you very much. And thank you, Sherwin-Williams, for being spectacular to us. All right. So, solar heat gain. I have a particular affinity for talking about solar heat gain, being that Vancouver in a milder climate, dealing with some of the performance gains, had buildings that were just grossly overheating. And that's at least in my, 8 to 10 year tenure within the window and door industry. That experience has been pretty universal. So today I'm going to go over some NBC changes that are specific to solar heat gain maximums that are going to be implemented for the 2025 code, and some occupant comfort changes that are coming. So in order to do that, I'm going to go through and I'm going to anchor the conversation to a project that I had that I think is a really nice example of what happens when solar heat gain modeling doesn't go great, and maybe some of the things that are fundamental issues, at least what I saw in the Toronto market and the Vancouver market. And for all of you here, apologies. I initially created this presentation for the building officials. So I'm going to go through a little bit of solar heat gain and the dynamics that are involved in it. It's going to feel like very basic education. So for anybody that's not really up to speed on it, hopefully you gain a little bit. But for everyone else, bear with me with the extra education. So we're going to go through what happens when it went wrong, and then those code changes, and then obviously building officials should fix that. I'll go through what, as a manufacturer, I think we can do to help manage that conversation about solar heat gain in a more positive direction. So here's my project. I had 2 townhouses. So the first townhouse had about 30 units. And then the second phase of that townhouse was going to be about 120 units. So as we got into the project, I was really lucky to be at the design phase where I was talking to the architect and we were getting things into it. And they had solar fins in, they had exterior shading, they had cooling. It was a Passive House certified project. There was a lot going on with it. And I really felt like the mechanisms for, call it, solar safety were in place. The heat management within the building was a good call. But I caught this one thing that I kept running into in projects where it was a 0.35 solar heat gain coefficient requirement. And so I raised my hand pretty early on and I said, I don't like this particular piece based on my experience. And the architect and the designer said, well, don't worry about it because we're going to have other things that help kind of manage it. So we'll deal with that problem further down the road. So like I said, I'm going to go through some basic education first. So what is solar heat gain coefficient? So it's a coefficient number between 0 and 1. 0 being no solar radiation is coming in, and 1 is all the solar radiation is coming in. So if you've got a 0.2 solar heat gain, 20% of that's coming through. If you've got a 0.6, then you've got 60% that's coming through. So as far as management of solar heat gain, one of the very few tools we have are low-E coatings. So low-E coatings, as this room would very much know, comes in 1 silver, or depending on which glass manufacturer, you've got different names, but ultimately for simplicity's sake, we kind of have silver applications where you've got layers of silver that are being applied to a surface of glass in order to manage the amount of solar heat gain that's coming in. There's also an I-89, which is a hard code, but I honestly try to ignore that whenever humanly possible. So one of the real frustrations that anybody that has managed solar heat gain in projects will have is that designers like to think about solar heat gain and U-value and the rest of our metrics like dials. That we just have these continuous processes that we can just kind of tweak it up, tweak it down. And, on the U value front, that's kind of true, that there are things you can do to frames, there's things you can do to the glazing pocket, there's a fair bit of flexibility there, but on solar heat gain, that's not true. That it's a category, it's a system. So you really have 3 places you can stand. Once you have agreed to a window system, a door system, you've locked yourself into one of 3 paths for solar heat gain. And so the 0.35 number really triggers because, there are manufacturers out there that can get 0.35, but it's not common. What you've got is like a 1 silver on the second surface is going to push you anywhere between, a 0.38 down up to, 0.5, 0.55. There's a lot of solar heat gain on that top end. And then if you use 2 silvers, you're getting down to like a 0.3, down to like 0.26. And then if you use 3, you're getting closer down to like 0.2. So when you've got a 0.35 prescriptive number that the designer is asking you to absolutely meet, there's no way to tweak that. Either you're going to get more heat or less. So before I get back into the project, I wanted to bring a topic that I'm pretty excited about is relative heat gain. So Alia Gellis had written a paper on glass comfort, and one of the items that he pulled out of kind of the caverns of Hot 2000, because it really was pretty deep in those numbers, is this concept of relative heat gain. So relative heat gain is a method in which we would take the solar heat gain coefficient and we take size-specific modeling, and we're able to create a watts per meter squared number. That's an excellent tool because what it does for us is it allows us to create a very tangible way to look at that heat gain. So for what it's worth, relative heat gain is based off of kind of your worst case scenario. It's a west face in the summer. So if you've got a solar heat gain of, call it 0.2, and you've got a standard size, NFRC rated window, you're going to get about 600 watts of energy with 2 silver, with 3 silver. With a 1 silver, a lot of heat gain number, like a 0.6, your relative heat gain is going to be 1800 watts. The difference between 1800 watts and 600 being 1200 is about the same amount of watts necessary in order to run a personal space heater. So what you got when you've got this window that is at standard size is you've got this little space heater during the summer that's going to be sitting outside that window heating up that room. And then obviously what's missed by many of the designers when they're looking at this is that the numbers they're getting from our windows is based off of a model size. The actual size, as it changes, will dynamically change the solar heat gain. So as the amount of glass to that standard size increases, so does the solar heat gain with that number. So there's a bit of a longer story, and anybody interested to learn a little on what happened to the city of Vancouver and their energy modeling guideline, feel free to come talk to me about it. But the Coles notes here is that we wound up at Fenestration Canada working with a small group of the city and building officials to create a size-specific modeling calculator. So in the next couple months, we should be seeing it on our website that you guys can put in your model sizes for your windows and be able to export a size-specific calculation. So you'll be able to know what that U value is and solar heat gain is for the actual size of the window.
This afternoon, the Tech Services Committee, Jomo is going to demo it for us.
Fantastic. So you guys can learn more through Jomo's presentation. So going back to this townhouse project. So on the first phase, we get to the shop drawings, we've got all the notes, and the energy modeler goes, but you're not meeting the 0.35 solar heat gain coefficient. And so I go back and I tell them, it's like, because no one can. It is an unreasonable thing, and you've already selected your product. You've locked in. I can give you this, I can give you this, or I can give you this. You can either have it much higher or much lower than what you're prescribed. And at that time, the value engineering, and for anybody that doesn't know what value engineering means, it means making the project cheaper. If they removed exterior shading. They removed the blinds. They left just rough-ins for the cooling units, which meant that 0.35 was going to leave that building. Well, okay, I should predicate. What I have found in Canadian projects, because of the way the mechanical load modeling works and because of the value that they put on passive heating, they oftentimes like to go to higher solar heat gain than lower solar heat gain. So this was one of those circumstances. And I was explicit with the architect and the general contractor that they will create a building on the west side of this building that overheats during the summer every time. It's a passive house project. So the problem with efficient buildings when you put high solar heat gain in is the heat comes in but can't get out. And so they had no way to manage their thermal gain throughout that project. So the first side of the project, they go to the city of Vancouver and they ask for a variance. The city of Vancouver goes, I don't really want to do that, but we will compromise with you. We will allow you to have a lower solar heat gain on the west side and the higher solar heat gain on the south side. And so they balance it in that way, which is asinine. So for this project specifically, I went ahead and took the solar heat gain number from the manufacturer's product and applied the relative heat or the size specific calculation for that. So we had a handful of like swing door side light combinations, and for one of those in every suite, you have about 1,470 watts per meter squared. So one configuration of a swing door and a side light was going to produce as much heat as more heat than a personal heater in there. Of course, the west side of that face is going to be miserable during the summer. So in phase 2, they not only went through all the value engineering where they removed the different items that would have stopped that solar gain, they decided they wanted to take the rough-ins out too. So there's no way to cool. And then we bring it back to the city of Vancouver, and the city of Vancouver goes, oh, but it's bigger and it's more liability, and I already have a tool. So they don't agree. So there's a project in Vancouver right now that's wrapping up its occupancy, and I am confident that anybody that moves in this summer is going to be miserable on the west side of that face. It really, I love this subject because it really pisses me off. It is wholly unnecessary for our modeling community to hold the windows hostage when there is a perfectly reasonable solution for switching from 1 silver to 2 or 2 to 3. We know it in the room. This is not a cost item. It would cost almost nothing for us to improve this particular item. So this is at the core of the problem. We've got a handful of models, and it's going to be a lot more severe in the milder climates than it is in the majority of our landmass in Canada. Fortunately, most of our population lives in the milder climates, so most of our buildings and the people that live in them absolutely will be affected by this as the performance improves in this building. Our metrics to the actual occupant comfort has been out of alignment. So I don't know how many people here are aware of the Vancouver heat dome that happened back in 2021, but for those that don't know, we had about a week in Vancouver where 619 people died of overheating. Mostly it was elderly and people at risk. And admittedly, most of the buildings had single pane glass and aluminum frames. I have a hard time seeing the difference between the buildings we're putting together now that have high solar heat gain but a really good envelope, and an envelope that was losing that heat much faster than our current buildings would, and the single pane. We have a problem. Unequivocally, this is an issue. And one of the big problems is that we've been using historical data for a good while. It's an average between 1987 and 2016. So we've been designing buildings, and we very generally, construction industry, we've been designing buildings for a time period that no longer is. And we're building buildings with the expectation that they're going to last 50 years into the future, 60 years into the future. So I think I'm trying to lead up to, in BC, one of the initial responses after that heat dome was a code change. Like, we saw a 26-degree maximum for a single dwelling based on average July temperatures. It is kind of disappointing because it was absolutely a step where they were trying to say the deaths have triggered a code response, and they did nothing. Like, and I say did nothing. They responded in a, I think, philosophical way. What they're saying is occupant comfort is a health and safety problem. That was important because I think that started the conversation down to 1823. So PCF 1823 is the solar heat gain maximum. You know, in this room, I think that probably impacts us more on the ER conversation through most of the country. But I'm going to take it very much from the occupant comfort, call it benchmark, that this is now. That as we get this implemented in the next 24 months, give or take, we'll start to see these solar heat gains go into effect. So, you know, Vancouver's zone 4, Toronto is zone 5, Nova Scotia, where we are in Halifax, is zone 5 and 6, according to Joe yesterday. So this kind of gives you an idea of what solar gain maximums you're going to need to see on those buildings moving forward. It's a good benchmark. I don't think it's the full solution, but it does help set some basic criteria for occupant comfort. So I want to give a big shout out, and I don't see anybody specifically from AVFQ, but anybody that was involved in the research that went in behind the PCF, greatly appreciated. That PCF at the national code level, because I sat in those meetings, wouldn't have been possible without that research. You know, I would say as Fen Canada, that's one of those things that I look forward to seeing more in the future. It's something I look forward to contributing to, is as we get things that are important to us, creating the relevant research in order to back it up. I think that's one of those gaps, frankly. We haven't seen, there's been research through NRC, there's been various groups that have done it, but a lot of the baseline research happened in like 87 to 89 in Orlando, Florida. Like, most of the baseline of who we are as an industry kind of came out of those moments. So then there's PCF 2061. And 2061 is interesting and deeply flawed. But it steps into a direction that you can expect buildings in 80% of Canada to have cooling units moving forward if the provinces adopt. When I say it's deeply flawed, there's a couple things that are not quite right about this PCF. One of them being that the modeling data that was done for it was done under HOT 2000. Sorry, we lost. Hey, Terry. Terry, do you know how to? So I'll just talk through this one. So one of the issues we have is in HOT 2000, or this particular PCF, all the data that was modeled in order to justify it was in HOT 2000, but the modeling is changing to F 2080 or F 2090, 280. Thank you. Murray would be freaked out if I. So it's now going to be an F 280. Perfect. Thank you. An F 280 modeling. Honestly, this is a bit of a response to that whole occupant comfort conversation, where I think what's happening is the code is seeing that there's a discrepancy between their models and what they're trying to get across as far as efficiency and people's health and safety when it comes to heat. So just to get at the core of the discussion with the townhouses, what bothers me about it is we have the tools to not do that, and they're not complicated. Like, we just have to stop the solar heat gain cycle. One item, 2 items. Like, for that 120 unit townhome, I went as far as creating a plexiglass insert in the operable windows so that somebody could put a cooling floor unit, because I know it's going to be miserable in there. Somebody has to be thinking about that thing. Otherwise, especially in Vancouver, they're buying a $1.2 million passive house condo that is going to overheat. And if you talk to most people that are moving into passive houses in Vancouver, more often than not, they'll tell you it's uncomfortable. That's crazy. That's not the building market I think we were planning to participate in. So for us at Fenestration Canada, manufacturers, I greatly encourage working on these problems early. Don't let them go. Make them a problem. Because I personally think, and I think Anton will attest, there is some liability pieces coming that are pretty sketchy. And I don't know, as window and door manufacturers, we get out of that. And I realize bias is here. But again, milder climates, we're going to see this. As the energy performance of these buildings continue to improve, the gain that we gets lost less. Ideally, some of the code changes that are coming are going to help eliminate some of that cycle issue. Mechanical cooling is a good thing in milder climate. We just will have hotter days moving forward. There's not a nice way around that. When you see solar heat gain numbers that are unrealistic, voice it whenever you can. And if you need help with guidance papers, I've got a couple that we can put in front of them that I want you to fight the good fight. These are things that shouldn't continue to happen. The buildings have to be built for people. And then I and Terry and anybody else that wants to go fight this fight, we will continue to educate designers and code officials. I did this presentation for the BOABC 2 weeks ago. And it was really well received. They get it, but they're at the end of the process. And it's kind of disappointing to hear the building officials go, as much as I am the AHJ, I also don't have power in this particular arena. And that's something that I'm very hopeful with the updated PCFs, we will start to see some changes on. It'll give them some power to rethink that conversation. So, bit of a wrap up of the whole conversation. The new codes are coming. You've got about 24 months before some of this is implemented. So if you've got ER stuff in the background that you're concerned about, good to reevaluate now. Anyway, not going there. The tools are improving. We will have this size-specific calculator. I really hope you guys go watch Jomo's calculator speech. I've really enjoyed working on that project with the team. I think what that provides us in the industry is filling the product-specific modeling gap to project gap. That transition is critical. We are going to have to do that in our industry at some point, and I love that we're at that point. Yeah, that kind of wraps up the presentation. Any questions?
Adrian, that table that you showed, which is the coming numbers, the maximum numbers, I'm assuming that those are numbers generated through either NFRC or CSA for 40.2. So again, talking about the size specific scenario.
Correct.
So, okay.
So we know Vancouver Island have high solar heat gain in the summertime and very little gain in the wintertime. If it's cold, it's over because it's overcast, and if it's clear, it's warm. So it's a great way to go with lower solar heat gain on the majority of homes in BC. What do we do for Winnipeg that usually experiences high solar gain and very cold days, but recently in the month of May had 37 degrees Celsius, which would have cooked the majority of homes, which would have had high solar heat gain glass because of the winters they experienced. Even Calgary, the same. They're now getting very hot summers, but they also get very cold winters with high solar gain.
So I love that question, and I think did a poor job of. I'm obviously passionate about the overheating side of this equation. That it bothers me a lot, but I don't see anything wrong with a high solar heat gain option as long as you've got passive solar mitigation and mechanical cooling. So it's a design problem. They can't. Yeah, what I'd really love to see is more solar fin manufacturers. That's one of those things, at least in the Lower Mainland, they exist, or if they don't really exist, what they're doing is that they're creating custom flashing type of details, and it's so expensive. And in Europe, it's common. It is like they have really simple solutions for some of the solar mitigation. We need to grow up a little bit.
And the problem solved itself for many years is colder areas just build homes with smaller windows because they
It's
wanted
also
to.
a solution.
That is, but now you're finding in areas like Calgary and very cold winters, they're building homes with massive window sizes, so they're going to experience the problems in there.
Yeah, the scaling is really interesting. I think the solar heat gain, whenever you're doing size-specific calculations, is the most surprising portion of it, because your glass ratio, as you just get another double the size of that item, your frame is included in that total solar heat gain, and it just becomes such a smaller percentage of the total area of that window. And so the scale really grows quickly with more glass. And because our standard sizes aren't really reflective of what we're building, everything has a higher solar heat gain when you're putting, or most buildings are going to have a higher solar heat gain than what is modeled.
So Adrian, I think the important part about this is this wasn't an issue in British Columbia until the Energy Step Code came in. And it didn't really become an issue until we got to Step 3, in my experience. And so for those of you that are seeing the national code and the tier code come in, and you're not experiencing this yet, it's coming your way. So what I've experienced with energy advisors, because all these numbers are being influenced by the energy advisor. I ask this question all the time: who is speccing the U value, the solar heat gain coefficient and U value for windows on buildings in BC today? It's the energy advisor. And then you ask, how? How are you determining that value? And they're determining that value based on the total energy this building is going to consume in 1 year. And Murray Frank made this comment. I did a post on this, and he goes, that's like buying a vehicle based on its annual gas consumption, regardless of if it can tow a trailer up a hill or go down it safely. Right? So I tell architects this all the time. I said, if you're going to buy an RV or travel trailer and you wanted to go up the Coquihalla Highway with it, would you buy it based on how much gas it's going to use in a year? Well, you're going to be the guy on the side of the road with steam coming out of the hood. And that's what energy advisors are doing. So they're doing their calculation based on average temperatures, whereas the product has to withstand peak temperature. So in BC, we're seeing summers get to 40 plus degrees Celsius. And then you put interior blinds on the inside, and you put high solar heat gain on it. And I think there's a good tech talk of a melted window. That happens. And so when I show energy advisors that when you spec 0.35, it doesn't exist. And you go 0.35 or higher. So I had a project where the shop drawings came across our desk and the windows were 0.55. But the energy advisor spec 0.35. And they're like, well, cooling will take care of it. Until the person shuts the air conditioning off, closes the blinds, and goes away in August on vacation.
Or they value engineer out the cooling.
But the problem with this is the energy advisors don't understand what's available on the market and not available on the market. They're picking numbers based on a calculation in a formula. They're not basing it on what we can actually do in the industry.
Yeah.
And so educating the energy advisors, and once the tier codes come in across the country, you're going to see this number 0.35 or higher, and sales teams are going to go look at the list and go, oh, I can put a single coat silver. I'm compliant. I win the job. 2 years goes down, and next thing you know, you have an issue on hand. So you have to speak up and say, no, I'm not doing this. Or if you keep saying, yes, we'll do it, then people go, well, your competition didn't say. I don't know if this is a... Yeah. But it's the idea that if I speak up and say we shouldn't do this, and the client goes, well, your competition didn't say anything. Well, did they not say anything because they don't know? Did they not say anything because they don't care? What's the purpose of that not saying anything? And so the voice, this is a great presentation. So I think it's going to amplify quite a bit.
Well, it's
and
we've got
not,
more work
not
to
to
do.
throw the EAs under the bus, but using high solar gain is a very quick, efficient way to get their models done.
Yeah. So on that note, so in the BC market with the climate zone, a 0.35 solar heat gain means you can put a 1.6 U value window in and meet step 3 of the step code, which is a fairly efficient building. If you I asked our energy advisors, if you cap it at 0.26, what does it mean for every single building in British Columbia? He goes triple, like 1.2 to 1.0 U value. So the high solar heat gain is getting free heat coming in the winter. Therefore, you don't need as much insulation. And so you can have a higher U value, so a lower cost window. So what do you think the developer wants to buy? The high heat gain window, because it's cheaper. What does the occupant want? the low U value and low solar heat gain.
They want to feel comfortable in their house.
Yes.
It's not complicated.
Questions?
We also have to consider that Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Calgary on the winter time has got probably 4 hours of sunlight. So
Correct.
basically, like to me, living in Edmonton and have it plus 35 in August, right? Definitely, it's triple silver. Like no
Yeah,
question, south and west side. That's what I would choose all day long. And winter time, hey, my 1 and 3 sealed units are still performing very well, even with triple silver.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add an item, kind of in combination to both of that I missed. The PCF 2091 does include climactic data for future buildings. So they are shifting that, and that actually is going to have a pretty big impact on us when it comes to some of our environmental load data. That data has not been finalized yet so the National Building Code, the way it works is that once you have completed the process of adopting all those PCFs and you've gotten the language in, you go into a pencils down period where essentially the CBHCC, the Canadian Board of Harmonized Codes, they go through and they do their administrative work to make sure everything is clean and ready to go and ready to launch for the National Building Code. So we're kind of in that period right now. Frankly, we could get to the end of this year and they could release the National Building Codes and it could be different than what we gave them. It's unlikely, but I would say my own personal confidence of that process is that they will not make any substantial changes from what was agreed to in those task groups and within the National Model Codes committees. But it's kind of hard for us to change the S1 data for NAVs without first getting the climactic data published for the NBC. We can make assumptions, but it's hard to know at this point.
How do they come up with those solar heat gain values as we go up in the energy or in the zones? Where we live in the summer right now, like in Prince George, BC, we're getting 15 hours of daylight. So, and then I got to have a 0.4 solar heat gain coefficient as a minimum requirement.
Yeah, unless
Maximum, okay.
unless you're going to go beyond
Still, that's pretty
30%
high.
glazing.
Like, that's what the builder is going to want to choose.
Yeah.
And
So-
that's going to cause incredible discomfort.
I wholly agree. I am not willing to stand on that it was a perfect or great solution. AVFQ did some good research on milder climates and how it was affecting overall. I think they're missing some of that conversation in the higher zones. That I personally have a bias for higher solar gain.
Said too, like in Edmonton, they get 5 hours of sunlight.
Yep.
In the winter, you're not getting any like free solar heat gain energy, like that's going to benefit as a lower, like it's a lower your heating costs, right?
I think there's still work to be done. Is going to your point. It's something that we need to do a bit more research on. And I think the window and door industry can be involved in those conversations meaningfully. I think Terry and I are only now getting our kind of arms wrapped around some of this process. My hope is within the next couple of years, you'll start to see more involvement at that kind of level. I mean, NRC reached out. This is a separate topic, and anybody interested to talk to me more about it after, more than free. But NRC reached out to us to talk about like an industry-wide EPD type of process. And so, government providing funding in order for us as an industry to support ourselves. That's good. That's great. That's exactly what I was like. That was hope. That was our hope for my role, is that we would start to get that level of government engagement, and we're there. We're about 8 months in, and I think we're starting to see that traction. My hope is, like I said, in the next couple of years, we'll see more of that, and we'll formalize it better. I'll create structures around it. But
your views are right in line with mine, and I agree. I mean, I'm in sales, and people want to be comfortable, and I understand the modelers want to they want to make this distinction between how much energy we're going to use. Where in your opinion, where's the breakdown in common sense?
It's at the quote line. Yeah, that's where it is. That's the breakdown.
Because it
Well-
really seems like a common sense issue. You know, is it a cheaper thing to have low solar gain and a heat pump to keep your home cool, or is it the other way around? That should be a pretty easy thing to.
No, Dave, let me answer first. So, to answer that question succinctly, I think we have a tool problem in our country. That we have tools that have preset destinations, and there are biases built into them that may not be cooperative for the environment we're building in. It is a major issue for me that governments seem to be okay adopting tool sets instead of methodology. And frankly, we're now at a place where some of this methodology that was the basis for the tool set needs to be reevaluated. It's work, just a lot of work. And so, yeah, I think there's a tool problem.
I think I've got an opinion on your question. The breakdown in common sense is you're buying a $1.2 million condo. It has the cheapest windows available, the cheapest appliances available, the cheapest interior fittings and furnishings and carpet that's available, and you're paying $1.2 million for it. And if you're lucky, it's roughed in for the air conditioning. If you're lucky.
What do you want for 1.2 million, Dave? Come on. It's only 1.2 million the way you said it. Come on, just if I may, I can give an example of where the frustration started was in BC because I'm no longer in the business. I'm not a manufacturer, but I just want to tell you what was stressful and what was frustrating was we were competing against manufacturers. This was even when the Energy Efficiency Act lowered the U value to 1.6, which was helpful. You could still purchase an Energy Star window with a 1.59 U value, so it met the Energy Efficiency Act, and a 4.5 was the solar heat gain, and it had an Energy Star sticker through the energy rating, through the ER path. And we didn't go that route because we manufactured on Vancouver Island. We knew that a 0.45 was going to cook eggs, on the countertop during most of the summertime. But we lost the sale because somebody would, of course, you'd buy an Energy Star window over a non-Energy Star window if everything else, if one's got an Energy Star on it and the other one doesn't, and the dollars are similar, wouldn't you? If I saw a fridge for $500 with an Energy Star sticker on it and one without, you'd go to the Energy Star fridge because that's what the government has done, is promoted that. So that was our frustration, and that's really where we started the conversation of we've got to manage solar heat gain in our marketplace.
Yeah, that's a great point. The potential to impact the Energy Star program is significant with this change in the ER path for products.
I bought an Energy Star, very good Energy Star rated dishwasher once, and it didn't actually wash the dishes. So I was whisper quiet too.
No, 1.3.
So I returned it and I said, give me the dishwasher with the lousiest rating. Installed that dishwasher. And you had to turn up the TV in the next room to hear over the dishwasher, but it did a great job.
No more patterns on the plates.
So to answer your question, Cam, and I just actually recently met with Al Ugalis for some stuff, and I told him that I'm working with his relative heat gain document, and he's really proud of that document, and he really wants us to leverage that document. And so what I did is I created a marketing campaign around "you bought the wrong glass." And so you get into the world of sales and education, and when you create this, what do you mean I bought the wrong glass? And then I would show people how an Energy Star window versus a non-Energy Star window, and I go, which window would you like? And once they're educated, they always pick the non-Energy Star window. But when there's a federal rebate for Energy Star windows, there's a problem there. I got to a point where more people would buy the non-rebate window once they realized the comfort issue. And they realized no government money is going to make me want this product. But the minute I converted a coefficient, so this is the problem. We're using a coefficient to communicate. And what is a coefficient? It's a number with no unit. So there's no relatable aspect to it. What does 0.45 mean to a homeowner? Any idea? would you explain that to a homeowner as a person sitting at a kitchen table talking to somebody?
45% of the radiation that comes in
Still, what
and
is-
the re-radiated.
That seems like a lot of shade, because if I'm outside, is that 100%? But the minute I converted it to relative heat gain, and I go, that window on a summer day is like that baseboard heater being on full blast all August, with your air conditioning on at the same time, by the way. Would you ever do that? And they're like, no, who would do that? That's stupid. And they're like, oh,
Yep.
now I get it. And every single time you explain it that way, they buy the triple coat low E all day long. So to me, we're having a long conversation. We're talking about coefficient. We need to turn it into relative and be focused on that conversation. That'll change it. So
I agree. I think that has been one of the more eye-opening things. I know for me personally, when Al first did that presentation and he was equating a standard size, and it's like, by the way, space heater. It's interesting. So when I did the presentation for the BOABC, they have 45-minute slots and an hour and a half. Had I had an hour and a half, I think I would have brought some personal space heaters. I like stage the room. So it's like, let me just turn this on for you so you can kind of get a feel for what that is.
It's worth pointing out too in this table that we anticipate is going to happen in the next code. That is total window to wall ratio, all elevations. They talked about trying to break it out by elevation, but at this point in time that they don't have the tools to deal with that. I expect at some point down the road that might change. So you're talking about a 0.4 mic for you. That's a 17% window to wall ratio or less. So probably not going to be too damaging for you unless you've got all 17% on the west side of the building, which is pretty unlikely. So might not be too bad. At least it's a step in the right direction.
It's a good option. It's not the better or best.
No, it's gonna continue to evolve as we move forward.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any other questions?
Ooh, I get to let you guys out 15 minutes early.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Okay. I think lunch is really close. It'll be up in a couple of minutes, and then we'll be back at 1 o'clock for the tech services. And I misspoke. Jomo's session is at the end at our tech update session. So the end of the day. All right. Enjoy your lunch.